The people call Rebecca Minocchio.
Witness entering. Remain standing. Face the clerk. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give before this court will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Pull your seat up. State your full name.
Rebecca Minocchio.
Spell your last name.
Manocchio.
Your county of residence?
Middlesex.
Good afternoon, Miss Minocchio. Please keep your voice up. You may inquire.
Good afternoon, Ms. Minocchio. As the officer mentioned, it's probably better if you scooch a little closer to the microphone to make sure everybody can hear you. Can you tell everyone where you work?
At the Trump Organization.
How long have you worked there?
11 years.
What is your current position at the Trump Organization?
Junior bookkeeper.
And are you testifying voluntarily today, or were you compelled to testify because of a subpoena?
I was compelled to testify.
Are you represented by counsel?
Yes.
Is counsel in the courtroom with you today?
Yes.
Can you tell the jury about your work history?
I worked at a supermarket, and then I got a job at the Trump Organization.
When did you get a job at the Trump Organization?
August of 2013.
Do you know who the head of the Trump Organization is?
Donald Trump.
What was your title when you joined the Trump Organization?
Administrative assistant.
And did your title later change?
Yes.
To what?
Executive assistant.
And when you were an administrative assistant, executive assistant, who did you work for?
Alan Weisselberg and Jeff McConney.
Who is Alan Weisselberg?
He was the CFO of the company.
And do you know what CFO is?
Chief Financial Officer.
And how about Jeff McConney?
He was the controller.
What's a controller?
I'm not really sure.
And how long were you an assistant to Mr. Weisselberg?
A long time, I would say like 8 years.
Did your role at the Trump Organization change again at some point?
Yes.
To what?
In 2021 to junior bookkeeper.
And as Mr. Weisselberg's assistant for 8 years, did you become familiar with the people Mr. Weisselberg interacted with at the Trump Organization?
Yes.
Did you sit near Mr. Weisselberg in your role as his assistant?
Yes, outside of his office.
When Mr. Trump was in the office, how often would Mr. Weisselberg interact with Mr. Trump?
Every day.
As the executive assistant to the CFO, did you have a role in paying bills at the Trump Organization? Can you please describe that briefly for the jury?
I did not pay bills.
But did you have any role?
Yes.
With how expenses were processed?
Put together?
Yes.
Yes.
Can you please describe that briefly for the jury?
I put checks with their backup together and gave them to Mr. Weisselberg to sign.
And what do you mean by backup?
The invoice.
Did every check that you put together for Mr. Weisselberg to sign have to have an invoice attached?
Yes.
Do you know if the process was consistent kind of across the Trump Organization for paying expenses?
Yes.
Do you know if Mr. Trump's personal expenses were processed by the Trump Organization?
Yes.
Do you know how Mr. Trump paid his personal expenses electronically?
By check both.
Can you recognize Mr. Trump's signature?
Yes.
And is that from viewing checks that Mr. Trump had signed?
Yes.
Now, did Mr. Trump get a new job in 2017?
He did.
Did he have to relocate for that job?
He did.
And what job did he get and where did he go?
The President of the United States, and he went to the White House.
And that is in Washington, D.C.?
Yes.
When Mr. Trump was in the White House, did the Trump Organization continue to process his personal expenses?
Yes.
And in 2017, who cut the checks for Mr. Trump to sign?
Deborah Tarasoff.
Who is Deborah Tarasoff?
She works in accounts payable.
At the Trump Organization?
Yes.
And she also... Did you say you worked in Trump Tower?
Yes.
And did Ms. Tarasoff also work in Trump Tower?
She did.
Now, when Mr. Trump moved to the White House, how did he get the checks he was going to sign?
I FedExed them.
And how frequently did you have to FedEx checks to Mr. Trump?
About once a week.
Can you describe that process in a little bit more detail for the jury? How would it get to Trump in the first instance?
Deb would give me the checks in a manila folder, and I would put them in a FedEx envelope with a return, and I would send them out.
When Ms. Tarasoff gave you checks for Mr. Trump to sign, did you ever look inside the envelope?
No.
Approximately how many checks would you send down to Washington, D.C. at a time?
Many, a few.
What was the kind of standard amount or range? Was it more than 50?
No, I don't know, like one at a time.
One at one time?
5, 10, 20, maybe between 10 and 20, I'm not sure.
Did you ever send more than that, if you recall?
It's very possible, yes.
Do you recall ever sending just a single check?
Yes.
After getting the checks, how long did it usually take for you to send them out?
That same day.
What did you do with the manila folder? Did that go in the FedEx envelope?
Yes.
Did you prepare the FedEx shipping labels?
I did.
Did you mention that you included a return envelope in that FedEx in each of those FedEx packages?
Correct.
Were the return envelopes addressed to come back to you?
Yes.
Was that using your address at the Trump Organization?
Yes.
So the checks that you sent down to Washington, D.C., were they signed or unsigned?
They were unsigned.
And what, if anything, did you receive back from D.C.?
They were signed.
Did you always check to make sure the checks were signed once you got them back?
Yes.
Whose signature was on the checks?
Mr. Trump's.
How quickly did you usually get the return envelopes back?
A few days.
And when you got the return envelopes, did you? If there were checks sent with backup, do you recall if the backup was still attached when the checks came back?
It was.
Were you ever informed that certain checks sent to Mr. Trump in D.C. had not been sent back up to New York?
Yes.
How did that happen?
Deb would let me know if there was something missing.
And what would you do next if there was something missing?
I would reach out to whoever I sent them to.
And who would you reach out to? Was that somebody in the White House?
Yes, Madeleine.
Do you remember her last name?
Westerhout, I think.
And she worked in the White House?
Yes.
And can you tell the jury what happened on those phone calls when a check didn't come back?
She would just look for it and see if she had it.
And what did she tell you would happen if a check was missing?
If it was missing, either it got lost or he had questions about it and he had to speak to someone.
And when you say he, you are saying?
Mr. Trump.
He might have a question on a check that was found?
Yes.
That is why he didn't send it back up?
Yes.
And if he had questions, what would happen? Would you question him?
No, that's as far as I go.
Would you just wait to get further instructions on what to do, if anything, with the checks?
Yes.
Now, do you understand you are testifying here today, in addition to other things, as a custodian of records for the Trump Organization?
Yes.
And based on your 11 years of experience working at the Trump Organization, do you know how the Trump Organization documents are created and saved?
Yes.
Before testifying today, did you have an opportunity to review files marked for identification as People's Exhibits 66, 291 to 293, and 303 to 305?
Yes.
Is People's Exhibit 66 for identification an email chain containing Trump Organization emails?
Yes.
Are People's Exhibits 291 to 293 and 303 to 305 for identification? FedEx invoices for the Trump Organization's FedEx accounts?
Yes.
Does the Trump Organization use FedEx in the regular course of its business?
Yes.
Did you see FedEx invoices for the Trump Organization as part of your job?
Yes.
Does the Trump Organization routinely generate emails in the regular course of its business?
Yes.
Does each email sent or received contain the content of the message, the sender, the recipient, and the date and time of the email?
Yes.
For the files marked for identification as People's Exhibits 66, 291 to 293, and 303 to 305, did the Trump Organization make and keep these emails and FedEx invoices the regular course of its business?
Yes.
Was it the regular course of business for the Trump Organization to make and keep these emails and FedEx invoices?
Yes.
Were the Trump Organization emails and FedEx invoices made at or around the time of the events and transactions being recorded?
Yes.
Were the people who made and kept these documents under a business duty to do so accurately?
Yes.
Did the Trump Organization rely on these documents to conduct its business?
Yes.
Do any of the exhibits that you reviewed reflect personal or non-business related activity?
No.
Did the exhibits contain redactions?
Yes.
Before testifying today, did you review the documents both with and without redactions?
Yes.
Aside from redactions, are all of the exhibits true and correct copies of Trump Organization business records?
Yes.
People now offer People's Exhibits 66, 291 to 293, and 303 to 305 into evidence.
1 minute. I am sorry, Your Honor. We have no objection.
People's 66, 291 through 293, and People's 303 to 305 are accepted into evidence.
Can we please display for the jury what is in evidence as People's 291? Ms. Minocchio, can you see that on the screen?
Yes.
Can you blow up the top half of this document, please? Do you recognize this?
Yes.
What is this?
It's a FedEx invoice.
And what is the invoice date?
May 29th, 2017.
And what are the last 4 digits of the invoice number?
6,768.
Can you tell what FedEx account this is for?
The Trump Organization.
And is this an example of the type of FedEx invoices that you would see in the regular course of your job?
Yes.
All right. Can we turn to page 1 of the PDF? I know that the font is a little small. Can you make out what that is on your screen?
Yes.
And does it show FedEx sent through the Trump Organization account?
Yes.
And who sent the FedExes shown on page 15?
I did.
Can we focus on the bottommost entry on this? See that?
Yes.
Is this an entry for a FedEx that you sent?
Yes.
And are you listed as the sender?
I am.
And what is the address under your name?
725 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York.
Are those the Trump Organization's offices?
Yes.
And who is the recipient of this?
Keith Schiller.
Who is Keith Schiller?
He was Mr. Trump's personal bodyguard.
Did he continue to be Mr. Trump's personal bodyguard in 2017?
Yes.
Directing you now to the shipping date in the top left, what is the date?
May 23rd, 2017.
And do you see to the right of that corner it says CUS Ref?
Yes, number 3.
Above that, is there a code?
DT.
Do you know what DT stands for there?
Donald Trump.
Do you know what this is a FedEx for?
His checks.
Mr. Trump's?
Mr. Trump's.
These are unsigned checks that you sent to Washington, D.C. for Mr. Trump to sign?
Correct.
And is the address under Keith Schiller redacted?
Yes.
Did you have an opportunity to look at the unredacted version of that?
Yes.
Is that a White House address that is provided for Mr. Schiller?
It's a personal.
It's a home address in D.C.?
Yes.
Do you know why you were asked to send Mr. Trump's checks to Keith Schiller's home address in D.C.?
No.
Who told you to send the checks to Mr. Schiller?
Either Rona or Allen.
When you say Rona,
Rona Graff.
do you know who Rona Graff is?
Mr. Trump's assistant.
Was that Mr. Trump's assistant at the Trump Organization or the White House?
The Trump Organization.
And by Allen, do you mean Mr. Weisselberg?
Yes.
Can you tell, based on the left-hand side of this entry, when the FedEx was delivered?
May 24th, 2017.
And it was sent by FedEx Priority overnight?
Yes.
Do you always send checks for Mr. Trump to sign by FedEx Priority overnight?
Always.
And do you see above that it says Tracking 1D?
Yes.
What are the last 4 digits of the Tracking 1D listed?
7,364.
All right. Can we somehow pull up what is in evidence as People's 292? Display that for the jury. Pull up the top half of the page, please. Ms. Minocchio, is this another Trump Organization FedEx invoice?
Yes.
What is the invoice date for this one?
June 5th,
What are the last 4 digits of the invoice number?
0242.
Can we turn to page 10 of the PDF, to the first full top entry? Do you see that?
Yes.
What is the date shown for the shipment date of this FedEx?
May 30th, 2017.
And who is the FedEx from?
Keith Schiller.
And who is it sent to?
Me.
And if you look in the top left-hand corner, there is like some fine print up there. And 3 lines down it says, do you see where it says Return Original Tracking ID?
Yes.
Do you know what that indicates?
That this was the return for the package that I previously sent.
What are the last 4 digits of the original tracking ID?
7,364.
And are those the same 4 digits from the FedEx that we just saw?
Yes.
So was this the return of the signed checks for Mr. DC back to you?
Correct.
All right. Let's take another look at what's now in evidence as People's Exhibit 293. Is this another FedEx invoice for the Trump Organization account?
Yes.
And what is the invoice date for this one?
June 26th, 2017.
What are the last 4 digits of the invoice number?
0271.
Can we please turn to page 15 of the PDF? Look at the second entry down. Can you describe what this is?
It's another package sent to Keith.
And that's another one that you sent to Keith?
Yes.
Did you ever send anything to Keith Schiller other than checks for Mr. Trump to sign?
No.
Are all of the packages between you and Keith Schiller Mr. Trump's checks?
Correct.
Does this also have the same customer reference DT at the top?
Yes.
What was the date for this one?
June 20th, 2017.
If you look at the tracking ID on the left, what are the last 4 digits of the tracking number?
6,957.
Can we now turn to page 21 of the same PDF and look at the bottom entry on that page? Ms. Minocchio, do you know what this is?
The return package.
Looking at the top left, what was the date for the return package?
June 21st, 2017.
Do you see the return original tracking ID listed?
Yes.
What are the last 4 digits?
6,957.
Are those the same 4 digits that we saw in the immediately preceding FedEx shipment that we looked at?
Yes.
Who is this from?
Keith Schiller.
And in the return envelope, would you also list Mr. Schiller's personal address in D.C.?
Yes.
That was sent back to you at the Trump Organization?
Correct.
Okay, we can take that down. Did there come a time in 2017 when the point of contact at the White House changed? Like a person you were supposed to send it to?
Yes.
Do you remember who it changed to?
John McEntee.
Who is John McEntee?
I couldn't tell you.
Fair enough. Can we pull up People's Exhibit 66, which is now in evidence? Miss Minocchio, do you recognize that?
Yes.
Can you describe what this is for the jury?
It's an email.
And are you copied on the top email?
I am.
And when you received the top email, did you also receive the emails underneath?
Yes.
And can we please blow up the email at the bottom of the page? Do you see that?
Yeah.
Who is this from and to?
This is from John McEntee to Rona Graff.
And you said John McEntee, where did he work?
At the White House.
What date was this sent?
September 7th, 2017.
And was this sent to Ms. Graff at the Trump Organization?
Yes.
Was there a subject of the email?
Checks to sign.
And can you read the content of the email for the jury?
Hi, Rona. Can you put me in contact with the Rebecca that works for Mr. Weisselberg? With Keith leaving, I will need the boss's personal checks mailed to me. Thank you.
And did you read this when you got it?
Yes.
When Mr. McEntee said, "Can you put me in contact with the Rebecca that works for Weisselberg?" Do you have an understanding of who he was referring to?
Yeah.
Who was that?
Me.
When he said, "With Keith leaving, who is Keith?"
Mr. Trump's personal bodyguard.
That was Mr. Schiller?
Yes.
The person you previously sent checks to?
Yes.
When Mr. McEntee said, "I will need the boss's personal checks mailed to me," who did you understand the boss to be?
Mr. Trump.
And in the subject line where it says, "Checks to sign," who did you understand? What did you understand that to be a reference to?
His personal checks.
Can we please pull up the top two emails, please? Is that too small to read?
I can read it.
Focusing on the middle email in the chain, who is that from?
Rona.
And who is it to?
John.
And are you copied on this email?
I am.
And can you read the content of this to the jury?
Hi, John. I copied Rebecca on this email. What is Keith's official last date? Best, Rona.
Looking now at the topmost email in the chain, who sent that one?
John.
McEntee?
Yes.
And who did he send it to?
Rona Graff.
And are you copied on that?
I am.
Can you read the content that email to the jury?
Thank you. It is the end of next week. We are all very sad to see him go. Rebecca, please email at, and I will give you the best address to use. Thanks.
Now I know that there is an email under that redaction.
Yes, there is.
Is it your understanding that that is a White House email or a personal email address?
It looks like a personal.
And do you know what Mr. McEntee meant when he said, "We'll give you the best address to use"?
Yes.
And what did he mean?
He was going to give me an address to where I needed to mail the checks.
And did you end up reaching out to Mr. McEntee?
I did.
We can take this down. Can we please display for the jury what is in evidence as People's Exhibit 303? Is this another Trump Organization FedEx invoice?
Yes.
What is the invoice date?
December 4th, 2017.
What are the last four digits of the invoice number?
9,417.
Can you please turn to page 13 of the PDF? Look at the third entry down on the page. Can you explain to the jury what this shows?
Me sending a FedEx to John McEntee.
And is the address there redacted?
Correct.
Having seen the unredacted address, is that a White House address or a home address?
Home address.
What is the date of the shipment here?
November 29th, 2017.
And you will see to the right under the customer reference box the letters AW. Who input the letters AW?
I did.
What does AW refer to there?
Alan Weisselberg.
And do you know what the FedEx packet was for?
Checks.
These were checks that you were sending to DC for Mr. Trump to sign?
Yes.
Why did the previous code say DT and this one said AW?
I just like to switch it up.
And did you ever send Mr. McEntee anything other than checks for Mr. Trump to sign?
No.
So all of the FedEx between you and Mr. McEntee were either unsigned checks for him to sign or checks that Mr. Trump had already signed?
Yes.
And what are the last four digits of the tracking ID?
6,548.
Can we please display for the jury what is in evidence as People's Exhibit 304? Is this another FedEx invoice for the Trump Organization?
It is.
What is the invoice date?
December 11th, 2017.
What are the last four digits of the invoice number?
4,356.
Can we please turn to page 7 of the PDF and blow up the top entry on that page? Can you describe what this is?
The return.
And do you know what this package contained?
Signed checks?
Signed by Mr. Trump?
Yes.
And looking at the return original tracking ID on the top left, what are the last four digits of that tracking ID?
6,548.
Does that match the last 4 digits of the FedEx invoice we saw?
Yes.
Can we now turn to page 12 of the same PDF and highlight the bottom entry on the page? And who is the sender for this one?
Tara Gillard.
Do you know who Tara Gillard is?
She was an assistant.
Who is she an assistant for?
Alan and Jeff.
And was she an assistant at the time when you were an assistant?
Yes.
Did she report to you?
Yes.
And do you know who is the recipient here?
John McEntee.
Do you know what Ms. Gillard was sending to Mr. McEntee?
Checks?
And those are checks for former President Trump to sign?
Yes.
What is the date of the shipment?
December 5th, 2017.
What is the customer reference there?
DJT.
Do you know what DJT indicates there?
Donald J. Trump.
And what are the last 4 digits of the tracking number?
4009.
Turning now to the final document, People's Exhibit 305 in evidence. Is this another FedEx invoice for the Trump Organization?
Yes.
What was the invoice date on this one?
December 18th, 2017.
What are the last 4 digits of the invoice number?
1446.
Can we please turn to page 23 of the PDF? Looking now at the last entry on the page, what is the date for this?
December 13th, 2017.
Does it indicate this is a return for an original ID?
Yes.
What are the last 4 digits listed for the original ID?
4099.
Does that match the last 4 digits for the FedEx that we just saw?
Yes.
Who were the sender and recipient for this one?
John is the sender and the recipient is Tara.
That is John McEntee from his Washington, D.C. home?
Yes.
To Ms. Gillard at the Trump Organization?
Correct.
And to your knowledge, Ms. Gillard and Mr. McEntee never sent anything other than personal checks for Mr. Trump to sign?
No.
No further questions.
Thank you. Ms. Nichelles, can you wrap this up before lunch?
We'll take it up later.
All right, jurors, we're going to break for our luncheon recess. Remember the admonitions, including that please do not discuss the case either among yourselves or with anyone else. Guilt or pleas, try to keep an open mind as to defendant's innocence. Please do not form or express an opinion as to the defendant's guilt or innocence. Doing on schedule, jurors, some of you might be wondering how we're scheduling. I am told by the attorneys we are on or perhaps a little bit ahead of schedule. Enjoy your lunch.
Jury leaving courtroom. Witness leaving courtroom.
You may be seated. Is there anything that needs to be addressed?
It doesn't need to be right now. We have 3 separate applications arising out of Ms. Daniels' testimony. One is our renewed motion for a mistrial. The second is a renewed motion to preclude the testimony of Ms. McDougal. The third is regarding the gag order as it relates to the witness who just testified. I can do that now or I can do it after lunch before the end of the day. It's up to the court.
Can we break early with the jury at 4 and take it up at 4?
Yes, Your Honor.
Enjoy your lunch.
Whereupon the court took a luncheon recess. Remain seated. Part 59 is now in session.
Let's get the witness, please.
A witness entering courtroom.
Good afternoon. I remind you, you are still under oath. Let's get the jury, please.
Jury entering courtroom.
Please be seated.
Case on trial continued. All jurors present and properly seated.
Jurors, one scheduling matter. We're going to break today at 4. Ms. Nichelles.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Ms. Minocchio.
Good morning.
We've never met, right?
No?
You've worked for the Trump Organization for 11 years.
Yes.
Does your aunt work there as well?
She does.
And is it a nice place to work?
Yes.
And you really didn't interact with President Trump?
No.
But you testified a lot on direct about some checks had sent to President Trump, right?
Yes.
And am I correct that President Trump was the only person who could sign his personal checks?
Correct.
And so all the checks for all of his personal expenses were what were being sent to President Trump in these Fed Express packages that you were talking about?
Right.
It was all the checks for all of his personal expenses, right?
Right.
There were no business expenses that were being sent to him?
Correct.
Because the business expenses, once he became president, he had nothing to do with those anymore, right?
Correct.
But the personal expenses that were being sent to him were things like his credit card payments?
Yes.
And expenses for his youngest daughter who was still in college?
Yeah.
And some of his wife's expenses as well?
Yes.
And those were the checks that he was the only person who could sign for, right?
Yes.
And the business checks were being signed by either Alan Weisselberg or Don Trump Jr.?
Correct.
You also sent the Federal Express packages for Ivanka Trump's personal checks, right?
Correct.
Her personal expenses were sent down were to be signed by her as well?
Correct.
Exactly the same way, right?
Yes.
You would send those checks in an envelope that went to FedEx to people instead of to the White House, right?
Yes.
And those checks were so that either Ivanka Trump or President Trump could sign them, right?
Yes.
And you testified that you got return envelopes back in a few days, right?
Yeah.
And these were all personal bills that had to be paid promptly, right?
Yes.
So getting them back promptly was important.
It was.
Do you know whether it took a long time for the White House to process personal mail for President Trump and get it to him?
No.
You don't know about that. And do you know whether speed was the reason that these were being sent in this manner?
Objection.
Sustained.
You worked as a junior bookkeeper, you said?
Yes.
Am I correct that it was the practice for legal expenses to be booked in President Trump's personal account or his personal general ledger as legal expenses?
I'm not sure.
You weren't in charge, you weren't involved?
No.
So you just don't know anything about that, right?
No.
On your direct examination, you were asked about how often Alan Weisselberg spoke with President Trump. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And you testified that it was about once a day?
Yes.
And that was for the period that was before President Trump started running for election, right?
Correct.
So, and after President Trump started running for election, he was out of the office a lot?
Correct.
And to the best of your knowledge, Alan Weisselberg was not speaking to him every day?
Correct.
President Trump was very busy and out of the office, right?
Correct.
And then, after President Trump went to the White House, after he was elected and went to the White House, to the best of your knowledge, President Trump and Alan Weisselberg didn't speak at all?
Correct.
I have no further questions.
Any redirect?
Nothing further.
Thank you. You can step down.
Witness excused.
People, your next witness.
Your Honor, the people call Tracy Menzies.
It will just be a minute.
Witness entering courtroom. Step this way. Raise your right hand and face the clerk. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony that you are going to give before this court and jury shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Do you so swear or affirm?
I do.
Thank you. Pull the chair up. Can you state your full name, spelling your last name?
Tracy Menzies, Menzies.
County of residence?
Monmouth, New Jersey.
Good afternoon, you may inquire.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Ms. Menzies. Can you please tell the jury where you work?
I work at HarperCollins Publishing.
What kind of company is HarperCollins?
Book publishing. We are the second largest book publisher in the world.
How long have you worked at HarperCollins?
25 years.
What is your current position there?
I am the Senior Vice President of Production and Creative Operations.
Have you testified in a legal proceeding before?
No, I have not.
This is your first time?
Yes, it is.
Do you understand that you're testifying today as a custodian of records for HarperCollins?
Yes.
Is HarperCollins testifying voluntarily, or was the company compelled to testify pursuant to a subpoena?
Compelled to testify, subpoena.
Does HarperCollins have counsel?
Yes.
Is HarperCollins' counsel present in the courtroom today?
Yes, they are.
As a Senior Vice President of Production and Creative Operations for HarperCollins, are you familiar with the company's book publishing process?
I am.
At HarperCollins, how involved are authors in the publication of their books?
At HarperCollins, the author has a partner. We work with them to approve files and their cover design, their designs, their content as we go to print it.
So you are saying there are multiple points in the publishing process for authors to have input into their books?
Yes, they're fully engaged.
That includes the cover design for the books?
Yes.
And also the content of the books?
Yes.
And are they required to sign off on that before the book is published?
Yes, they are.
How about if there is more than one author? Are all of the authors required to sign off before the book is published?
I believe so.
Are you familiar with the book entitled Think Big, Make It Happen in Business and in Life?
Yes, I am.
How are you familiar with that book?
It's here. I looked through it.
It was published by HarperCollins?
Yes.
Before testifying today, how did you obtain the copy of that you have with you now?
I ordered it from the warehouse using the HarperCollins website.
And is that different from the way a member of the public would buy the book?
Yes, it's direct from the warehouse, so not through a retailer.
And do you know if there was an audiobook associated print book?
There is an audiobook, yes.
Do you know who the author of this book is?
I do.
Who is the author?
There are two authors, Donald Trump and Bill Zanker.
Do you know who narrated the introduction for the audiobook portion of the book?
I believe it is Donald Trump.
Before testifying today, did you have an opportunity to review files marked for identification as People's Exhibit 415 and 415A through F?
Yes, I did.
Are those examples a set of excerpts from the book Think Big, Make It Happen in Business and in Life?
Yes, they are.
Do some of the exhibit pages contain redactions?
Yes, they do.
Before testifying today, did you have an opportunity to compare People's Exhibit 415A for identification with the publisher's version of the book that you obtained?
Yes, I did.
Other than the redactions, are the exhibits exact copies of portions of the publisher's version of the book?
Yes.
We now offer People's Exhibit 415 and 415A through F into evidence.
No objection.
People's 415 and 415A through F are accepted into evidence.
Can we show the jury what is now in evidence as People's Exhibit 415? Do you recognize this?
I am sorry.
Can you see the screen?
Yes, I do.
What is this?
This is the Think Big, the book.
The book that you purchased?
Yes, purchased and published, yes.
Do you see the names of the authors on the cover of the book?
I do.
And can you read the authors' names from the top of the page?
It says Donald Trump and Bill Zanker.
And can you talk about, in terms of cover design, the relative font sizes of the two authors' names?
Well, Trump is pictured on the cover, and his name is quite large. And Bill Zanker is more of a supporting role with a smaller font.
Is a picture of Bill Zanker also featured on the cover?
No.
Can we turn to the next page of the PDF? Do you know what this is?
This is the title page of the book.
Does this have Mr. Trump's full name?
Yes.
Finally, turning to the last page of the PDF. Do you recognize this?
Yes, this is the copyright page.
And whose names are next to the copyright?
Donald J. Trump and Bill Zanker.
Can you tell what year this book was first published?
The year it was first published, 2007.
In what year is this edition of the book?
2021.
How can you tell?
On the printer line on the bottom. On the left-hand side, it tells you the date.
Can you tell the publisher information for this book?
Yes.
Does it list HarperCollins as the publisher?
Yes, it does.
Now, are you familiar with the contents of this book?
Yes.
Is there a way for the reader to tell which part of the book was written by which author?
Yes, there is. There are different sections. One of the sections are called Zanker's Take, also the design of the book. Zanker's Take has like a graph above it, so it separates it out from Donald Trump's words. Donald Trump's words, or at least the writing, is in a sterile front, and Zanker's is a non-sterile front, a thinner font. So you could tell the difference between the two.
So, there are multiple ways for readers to tell which author is speaking in a portion of the book?
Indicate which author is speaking.
Can you please publish for the jury what is now in evidence as People's Exhibit 415A? Can you see that on your screen?
Yes.
Is this an excerpt from the same book?
Yes.
What page is this from?
154.
Based on your review of the book, is this from a section of the book attributed to Mr. Trump or Mr. Zanker?
Mr. Trump.
Is that true of the rest of the exhibits that form part of People's Exhibit 415?
Yes.
Is there a section heading here at the top of the page?
Yes.
What does that say?
Do not trust anyone.
And what does the unredacted content of the page say?
I used to say go out and get the best people and trust them. Over the years, I've seen too many shenanigans. Now I say, get the best people and don't trust them. Do not trust them because if you don't know what you're doing, they're going to rob you blind. I know dozens of sophisticated business people who hired accountants and lawyers and others, and they trusted them. They got killed. They lost their business. So I say, get the best people and don't trust them.
Can you please display for the jury what is in evidence as People's 415B? Ms. Menzies, is this another excerpt from the same book?
Yes. Sure. As a matter of fact, I value loyalty above everything else. More than brains, more than drive, and more than energy.
Can we please display for the jury what is in evidence as People's Exhibit 415C? Is this another page from the same book?
Yes. Page 162.
Please read the unredacted portion of the page.
I think the reason we have so many loyal people is that we reward loyalty, and everybody knows this. It has become part of the corporate culture at the Trump Organization. People like Alan Weisselberg and Matt Calamari are great and have proven themselves over many years.
So I think you said corporate culture at the Trump Organization?
Corporate culture of the Trump Organization.
Now, can we please display 415D to the jury? What page is this?
Page 180.
Can you please read the unredacted portion of this?
Sure. I just can't stomach disloyalty. I put the people who are loyal to me on a high pedestal and take care of them very well. I go out of my way for the people who are loyal to me in bad times. This woman was very disloyal, and now I go out of my way to make her life miserable.
Can we please display People's 415E? What page number is this?
Page 183.
Can you read the unredacted portion to the jury?
My motto is always get even. When somebody screws you, screw them back in spades.
Finally, can we pull up People's Exhibit 415F? What page is this?
192.
Can you read the unredacted portion of this page to the jury?
When you're wronged, go after those people because it is a good feeling and because other people will see you doing it. Getting even is not always a personal thing. It's part of doing business.
No further questions.
Mr. Blanche.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My name is Todd Blanche, and I represent President Trump. We've never met before, have we?
No, we have not.
Just a couple of questions. Now, this book was published in 2007. Is that correct?
Yes.
You worked for a long time for HarperCollins. Were you part of the publishing of this particular book?
No, I was not.
So you said a little bit about the cover and how HarperCollins will work with the author to come to what the cover should look like and how it should be presented. At the end of the day, is it fair to say that covers of books, at least in part, are designed and developed for sales to help sell the book? Is that fair?
They're helped to sell the book, but they're also done very closely with the author.
Understood. And just to spend a few minutes on what you were just asked to read, every page that you read was partially redacted, correct?
Yes.
And you have the book in front of you. Is it fair to say that the book is 380 pages? You can check?
Yes, that's fair to say.
Is that right?
Close enough.
And you were shown 6 pages in between pages 154 and 192, correct?
Yes.
A portion of 6 pages, correct?
Uh-huh.
Did you pick those or did the prosecution?
I did not pick them.
Now, it's not unusual that this book has acknowledgments and whatnot, with the author thanking, for example, people that helped him along the way.
Yes.
That's not unusual?
No.
Does every book have that?
I think most books.
Are you familiar with the book that you have in front of you that Donald Trump, President Trump, thanked a number of people, including a staff writer named Meredith McCulver? Does that ring bell to you? I can show you if you don't want to look.
Show me.
If we can show for the witness and the court and the parties M3. So look at the top paragraph. There are a number of names. Do you see a staff writer?
I see, yes.
And then, if you can leave that up, President Trump also thanks a number of folks from your place?
Yes.
From HarperCollins. That is not unusual, is it?
No.
And you testified, I believe, that there are 2 authors, Mr. Zanker and President Trump, and that the book kind of distinguishes between the two as far as which portions were written from President Trump and which portions were written by Mr. Zanker. Correct?
Yes.
Is it fair to say Mr. Zanker and President Trump in their respective sections may have had help writing the words that were ultimately published?
I wouldn't know that, but it's possible.
Is that something that, for example, the acknowledgments would acknowledge?
They could, sure.
No further questions.
Any redirect?
No.
Witness excused.
Your next witness.
The people call Madeleine Westerhout.
Witness entering courtroom. Raise your right hand and face the clerk. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony that you are going to give before this court and jury shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Do you so swear or affirm?
Yes.
Thank you. Pull your chair up. State your full name, spelling your last name.
Madeleine Westerhout, Westerhout.
County of residence.
Orange County.
Good afternoon. You may inquire.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Ms. Westerhout. Good afternoon. Can you please tell the jury where you work? I work as geopolitical consulting firm. What do you do there? I am chief of staff to the chairman. How long have you worked there? About a year and a half. Do you know former President Trump, Donald Trump? I do. How do you know him? I was his executive assistant and director of Oval Office operations in the White House. Are you testifying voluntarily today, or were you compelled to appear pursuant to a subpoena? I was compelled to appear by subpoena. Have you testified in a legal proceeding before? No, I have not. Have you been inside of a courtroom before today? No, I have not. Are you nervous to testify today? I am now, yes. Are you represented by counsel? Yes. Is your counsel here today? Yes, he is. Who is paying for your lawyer? He is graciously taking this case pro bono. Can you tell the jury a little bit about your educational background? Sure. I went to the College of Charleston, got my undergraduate degree in political science. What did you do after you graduated? I moved to Washington, D.C., where I had an internship on Capitol Hill for a couple of weeks while I was looking for a job. Then I got a full-time job at the Republican National Committee. For those who may not know, what is the Republican National Committee? The Republican National Committee, otherwise known as the RNC, is the Republican Party's National Party Committee. So their main role is to elect Republicans up and down the ballot, but really focusing on electing a president. Is it fair to say it's the organization that runs the Republican Party? Yes, I think that's fair to say. And when you joined the RNC, was it your full-time job to work for the RNC's finance director?
Yes.
And did your role at some point change?
It did, yes.
And can you explain what happened to the jury?
After the 2014 cycle, my boss, who was the financial director, was promoted to the chief of staff. So I became her assistant, as she was the chief of staff.
In that role, was it your full-time job to interact with the RNC's chief of staff?
Yes.
How long were you in that role?
From June 2013 to January 2017.
And in total, how long were you part of the RNC?
3.5 years.
And did you work directly for RNC leadership that entire time?
Yeah.
At some point in October 2016, did you become aware of what became known as the Access Hollywood tape?
Yes.
What was that?
It was a tape of Mr. Trump, and I believe it was Billy Bush having a conversation.
And what impact did the Access Hollywood tape have on the leadership of the RNC?
At the time, I recall it rattled the RNC leadership.
Did the RNC leadership consider replacing Mr. Trump as a candidate?
It's my recollection that there were conversations about how to, if it was needed, how it would be possible to replace him as the candidate if it came to that.
Was Mr. Trump ultimately the Republican candidate in the 2016 election?
Yes, he was.
Before the 2016 election, did you ever work for Mr. Trump or his campaign?
No, I did not.
What happened to your role after Mr. Trump was elected?
After Mr. Trump was elected, I went and spent some time in New York working out of Trump Tower. Once the party has a nominee, the Republican Party, the RNC, that campaign really combines forces and then works really seamlessly. After the election, I spent time in Trump Tower and helped the president-elect schedule high-level interviews. So people that were interviewed for cabinet positions or high-level senior staff roles.
How much time did you spend in Trump Tower during that period when Mr. Trump was the president-elect?
I was still living full-time in Washington, D.C., but myself and a couple of my colleagues at the RNC would travel to New York and spend most of the working days in New York. So a majority of the working days from November until about January.
You say that your role there was to schedule high-level meetings for Mr. Trump at that time?
Yes.
Did you get a nickname in the media due to your role in scheduling high-level meetings?
Yes.
What was that?
The greeter girl.
Did you work with or do you know somebody named Rona Graft?
I do.
Who is Rona Graff?
She was President Mr. Trump's long-term executive assistant at the Trump Organization. I don't recall her exact title, but she had been with him for a very long time.
Do you know how long she had worked for Mr. Trump before he was elected president?
I think over 10 years. I'm not 100% sure.
Based on your experience, withdrawn. Did you work with Ms. Graff during this transition period when Mr. Trump was the president-elect?
Yes. She had a role in helping the RNC schedule his interviews. She was still really taking over, really had a handle on his schedule as he wasn't yet the president. He was still working out of Trump Tower, so we worked seamlessly together.
Based on your experience working with Ms. Graff, was Mr. Graff familiar with Mr. Trump's preference and work habits?
Yes.
And also Mr. Trump's contacts?
Yes.
Do you know someone by the name of Michael Cohen?
Yes.
Who is Michael Cohen?
He was the president's former lawyer.
And how do you know him?
He was around in Trump Tower.
And when you say he was around in Trump Tower, that's at this time between the election and inauguration?
Yes.
The end of 2016 and early 20177?
Yes.
At some point during this period, were you offered a job at the White House?
Yes.
Can you tell the jury about that?
Sure. My boss at the time came to me and said, "Do you have any interest in sitting outside the Oval Office?" I said, "Yes, I do. That sounds like it would be a very cool job."
Were you offered a particular job title at that time?
I honestly don't remember at this time if titles were discussed, but I knew I was going to sit outside the Oval Office. I didn't care what my title was.
Do you remember around when that conversation took place?
I believe December of 2016.
And had you spent any time working directly with Mr. Trump when you were offered that position?
No.
Do you know when Mr. Trump moved from Trump Tower to the White House?
January 20th, 2017.
And how do you know it was that date?
That was the inauguration date.
Did you also move to D.C. full-time on that date?
I had never technically moved to New York, so I just stopped going to New York.
Did you attend the inauguration?
I did, yes.
And what happened after the inauguration?
After the inauguration, I went to a government building across the street from the White House and, went through security, and then, with a couple of my new colleagues, were put in a van to drive across the street. And then we were taken into the West Wing, kind of shown around a little bit, taken into the Roosevelt room where we were given laptops and cell phones, and then I was taken to my desk, which was, as I had been told, right outside of the Oval Office.
Did you start work that day?
Yes, technically.
Had you been to the West Wing before then?
No.
Can we put up the parties, just for the witness and the court People's Exhibit 390 for identification? Ms. Westerhout, do you recognize this?
Yes.
What is this?
This is a map of the first floor of the West Wing.
Did you create this map?
No, I did not.
Do you find the map to be a fair and accurate depiction first floor of the West Wing?
Yes.
I now offer People's Exhibit 390 into evidence.
No objection.
Accepted into evidence.
Pull up 390 for the jury. Is this the floor plan you were talking about?
Yes.
Where is the Oval Office on the floor plan?
It's the Oval Office labeled Oval Office on the bottom, in the middle.
Can we pull up just the section floor plan around the Oval Office, please? Can we make it a little bit wider? And can you see that in front of you, Miss Westerhout?
Yes.
Do you see the number 7 on the floor plan?
Yes.
Can you describe, I believe it's a little bit above and to the right of the office. Is that correct?
Yes.
Can you describe what that area is to the jury?
That is the area known as the Outer Oval Office.
What is the Outer Oval Office?
It's where the president's secretaries or assistants sat.
And can you describe for the jury where your desk was relative to the Oval Office?
Yes, if you look at number 7 as like a square, my desk was the bottom right.
So your desk was up against the wall of the Oval Office. Is that right?
Up against the horizontal line kind of coming out of the Oval Office.
Did anybody in White House sit closer to Mr. Trump than you did?
Not in the first few months, no.
Did anybody else sit in the Outer Oval with you?
Yes.
Who else sat in the Outer Oval?
Hope Hicks.
Who is Hope Hicks?
She was the president's communications director.
And was there anybody else that sat in that area?
Yes, in the Outer Oval Office there was another little room, and 2 of his aides sat there.
Who were those 2 aides in 2017?
John McEntee and Keith Schiller.
Do you know what their titles were?
I believe Keith was the director of Oval Office operations. I believe John was personal aide to the president.
Do you know someone by the name of Dan Scavino?
Yes.
Who is Dan Scavino?
Dan Scavino was one of the president's very trusted advisors.
Did he have a particular role in the White House?
He did a lot of the president's communications and especially helped the president get tweets out and other statements.
So he worked with Mr. Trump on social media?
Yes.
As the executive assistant. Withdrawn. Did you later find out what your formal title would be in the White House?
Yes, special assistant to the president and executive assistant to the president.
And in those roles, who was the focus of your attention?
The president.
Is that your only focus?
I tried to have it be my only focus.
When you started the job in January 2017, did you have job training or orientation?
Not formally, no.
How did you learn how to do your job?
The first few months I tried to really observe people that had been close to him. So people like Hope and John and Keith and Dan, and learn his preferences. Then it was just a lot of on-the-job training. You know, we really started full force day 1, so just trying to do my best to keep up.
When you say Hope and John and Keith and Dan, are you referring to Hope Hicks, John McEntee, Dan Scavino, and Keith Schiller?
Yes.
Was it your understanding those 4 individuals had previously worked with Mr. Trump?
Yes.
Did you also make an effort to learn Mr. Trump's preferences by observing him while you were sitting in the Outer Oval?
Yes.
How long did you end up working in the White House?
Until August 2019.
Is that a total of 2.5 years?
Yes.
Did you have the same job in the White House the whole time?
The same job, yes. But at some point my title changed to Special Assistant to the President and Director of Oval Office Operations.
Did you sit at the same desk in the Outer Oval the entire 2.5 years you were in the White House?
I switched desks at some point. Like I said, there were 2 desks there. At some point I switched to the desk that was further away, but it had a line of sight to the Resolute desk. That was more helpful to kind, for the president and I to communicate.
And for those who may not know, what is the Resolute desk?
That is the desk where the president sits in the Oval Office.
After working closely with Mr. Trump for 2.5 years, did you develop an understanding of his work habits?
I did, yes.
How about list preferences?
I hope so.
How about Mr. Trump's relationships and contacts?
Yes.
Are you familiar with the way that he used social media?
Yes.
Are you familiar with the way that he interacted with others at the White House?
Yes.
And are you familiar with the way that he interacted with his family?
Yes.
So, turning now to his work habits, what was Mr. Trump's preferred method of communication?
He liked speaking with people in person or on the phone.
And about how many calls did Mr. Trump typically take in a day?
A lot.
Do you know approximately when he started taking calls in the day?
I remember times where, I knew he was taking calls as early as 6 in the morning.
And when would he stop taking calls at the end of the day?
Again, it depended. I recall times he would be on the phone late into the night after I went to bed, so I always felt guilty about that.
How did you call the president at work? Can anybody call the president of the United States? Is this a more complicated process?
There is a rather complicated process. If the president is in the Oval Office and someone calls in and they had my desk phone number, they could just call that number. If the president was available, I would patch them through. If someone was calling in, John Smith, off the street and just calling 1-800 White House, obviously, they wouldn't be patched through to the Oval Office. But there were operators that took calls and then kind of determined if that person was someone that needed to get patched through either to myself or other members of the president's staff. There were also calls made by the Situation Room, calls that were more secure that might need to be on a secure line. People might call through the Situation Room.
Once the White House operators had screened calls, did you see the calls that came to you after that?
I am sorry.
Let me say that again. After the calls were screened, did they typically come to you before going to Mr. Trump?
If he was in the Oval Office, yes.
So you were able to see much of the many people that he spoke to while he was there in 2017?
Yes.
Did Mr. Trump use a computer?
Not to my knowledge.
Did Mr. Trump have an email account?
Not to my knowledge.
Did Mr. Trump prefer electronic documents or hard copy documents?
He liked hard copy documents.
And did Mr. Trump like to read?
Yes.
Did his role in 2017 require a lot of reading?
It did, yes.
Where did he actually do his work?
After a few weeks, he kind of moved his working space into a room off of the side of the Oval Office, known as the dining room. He really just, I remember, wanted to keep the Resolute desk very pristine and kind of keep that more for meetings. Then he spent most of the time when he was working, reading, going over documents in the dining room. And that was really his working office.
Were the hard copy documents that he liked to review kept in the dining room?
Yes.
Was there an organization system there?
To my understanding, the president knew where things were and he kept it organized. But he did have a lot of papers and often brought things back and forth to his residence or Air Force One or Marine One. I thought he always knew where things were.
In general, is he the type of person who would pay attention to details?
In my experience, yes.
How about his signature practices? Did he have to sign things that you saw in that first year in 2017?
He did.
Did he use an automated signature or prefer to sign himself?
He preferred to sign things himself.
That was signing by hand?
Yes.
Was there a particular style of pen he liked to use?
My recollection is he liked to use a Sharpie or a felt tip pen.
Based on working with him for 2.5 years, can you recognize Mr. Trump's signature?
Yes.
Did Mr. Trump have to review and sign a lot of documents that year in 2017?
Yes.
In your experience, did he typically read things before signing them?
Yes.
Do you know if Mr. Trump used social media while he was in the White House?
He did, yes.
What was the primary social media platform that he used?
Twitter.
Is that now called something else?
X.
Do you know what Mr. Trump's Twitter handle was in 2017?
@RealDonaldTrump.
Did Mr. Trump post tweets himself using that Twitter handle?
He did, yes.
Did anyone else have access to the @RealDonaldTrump Twitter account in 2017?
It's my understanding that Dan Scavino had access to it.
Was there anybody other than Mr. Trump and Mr. Scavino?
Not to my knowledge.
In the 2.5 years when you worked with Mr. Trump, did you ever see Mr. Scavino post a tweet without Mr. Trump's approval?
I did not see Dan post. I didn't see the president or Dan ever post a single tweet. Not to my knowledge. If there was a video recap of an event or something that might have gone out without the president's approval, it's my understanding and recollection that the president did like to see the tweets that went out.
Do you know if that account was password protected?
I believe so, yes.
Did you ever work directly with Mr. Trump on his Twitter posts?
Once in a while, if Dan wasn't available, the president would call me and dictate a tweet to me. I would quickly scribble it down and then go back to my computer and type it up so that the president could actually read it because he wasn't able to read my handwriting. Sometimes print it back out, give it to him so he could look over it. It just depended if he put it out or held on to it or made edits to. That was the extent of it.
He would dictate a tweet to you, then you would go type it up on your computer?
Yes.
Then you would print a hard copy document?
Yes.
and take that in for him to review?
Yes.
Would he then edit sometimes the hard copy printout?
Sometimes yes.
Would he ask you to make additional changes and then show it to him?
Sometimes.
Did he have any particular preferences when it came to the way that he wrote social media posts?
My recollection is that there were certain words that he liked to capitalize. Words like country, and he liked to use exclamation points.
Did he also periodically correct other punctuation, like commas or comma locations?
It's my understanding that he liked to use the Oxford comma.
Now, during that first year that Mr. Trump was in the White House in 2017, would you describe that as a transition period? That first year that Mr. Trump was in the White House?
Yes. I think the first year of any administration is a transition year. We were all trying to learn our way around and, do the best work we could for the American people.
And you and others were doing things for the first time that year?
Yes.
And was Mr. Trump busy that year?
Yes.
Was he constantly being pulled in a lot of different directions?
Yes.
Based on your experience, were there things he overlooked or forgot during that period? Was he still attentive to the things that were brought to his attention?
My understanding is he was attentive to things that were brought to his attention.
During that first year in the White House in 2017, when things were in transition, did you coordinate with the Trump Organization?
Yes, on some things.
Did you ever have questions for employees at the Trump Organization?
Yes.
And did Trump Organization employees ever have questions for you?
Yes.
Who was your main point of contact at the Trump Organization in 2017?
Rona Graff.
And again, that was Mr. Trump's Trump Organization's executive assistant?
Yes.
And she remained at the Trump Organization after Mr. Trump moved to Washington, D.C.?
Yes.
When Trump Organization employees had questions for Mr. Trump, did you pass those along?
Yes, sometimes.
Were there ever times that you didn't pass along something you were asked to?
No, but it could have been they asked somebody else.
When Mr. Trump had questions for Trump Organization employees, did you pass those along?
Yes.
What types of things did you coordinate with Ms. Graff on during that year in 2017? Did you coordinate on Mr. Trump's contacts?
Yes, we did.
How about calls to and from Mr. Trump?
Yes.
How about Mr. Trump's calendar?
Yes.
Mr. Trump's travel schedule?
Yes.
Mr. Trump's golf schedule?
Yes.
How about the first family's travel?
Yes.
Personal mail for Mr. Trump?
Yes.
What other logistical issues?
Such as?
For example, if there was an issue getting through on a particular number or other things that were lost in translation, anything like that?
Sure, yes.
Overall, how frequently were you in touch with the Trump Organization in 2017?
Especially the first few months, I think Rona and I spoke at least weekly, sometimes daily. But that trickled off as I kind of grew in the role and the contacts kind of shifted over to more of the White House side.
And in total, how many communications would you say you had with the Trump Organization in 2017? A rough estimate. Is it fair to say it was dozens of communications?
Dozens.
Now, one of the things you just mentioned was Mr. Trump's contacts, right?
Yes.
And did you get guidance from Ms. Graff on contacts that were important to Mr. Trump?
Yes.
Can we show the jury what is in evidence as People's Exhibit 68? And can we blow up the top portion of the page? All of the portions. Ms. Westerhout, do you recognize this?
Yes.
What is this?
It's an email exchange between Rona and myself.
And looking at the bottommost email on the chain, who is that from?
From me to Rona.
What is date of that email?
Tuesday, January 20th, 2017.
And are there certain redactions in this email?
Yes.
Have you reviewed the unredacted version of this email?
Yes.
And is that an email sent from your White House email address?
Yes.
And is that sent to Rona Graff's Trump Organization address?
Yes.
And what's the subject of this email?
Contacts.
Can you please read the content of that email to the jury?
Yes. Could you have the girls put together a list for me of people that he frequently spoke to? I don't want to have to bug you all the time, even though I will still call often. Smiley face.
When you said, could you have the girls put together a list for me? Who were the girls?
There were a couple of other assistants that worked under in the Trump Organization.
When you said a list of people that he frequently spoke to, who does he refer to there?
President Trump.
And why can you explain to the jury kind of why you sent this email?
Yeah. So when I got to the White House, I naively assumed that the operators kind of had everybody's phone number, and that is not the case. They didn't have really any phone numbers. And so the president would often ask, call John Smith, call so-and-so, and I didn't have their phone numbers. So I would call Rona all the time, asking for phone numbers for people, and that's something. I guess 4 days in, I just asked her to put together a list for me that she thought would be helpful of people that he either spoke to often or might want to speak to.
If you look at the top email on the chain, how did Ms. Graff respond?
She said, "I'm working on it. Hope to have it to you in a little while."
Can you now pull up what's in evidence as People 69? Focus on the top portion of the page. Do you recognize this?
Yes.
What is this?
An email exchange between myself and Rona.
Who is that from?
Rona.
Who is it to?
Me.
What is the subject?
Contacts.
What is the body of the email?
How is this for a start, R?
Is this a copy of the email we just looked at?
Yes.
Can you explain that to the jury?
Sorry?
Withdrawn. Is Ms. Graff sending you the contacts that you had previously requested in the email we just looked at?
Yes.
Is there an attachment to this email?
Yes, it says DJT Limited Contacts WH.
What does WH stand for there?
White House.
Do you know what file type that attachment is based on what's listed there?
Yes, that's an Excel document.
Before testifying today, did you have an opportunity to review the Excel file that was attached to the email?
Yes.
Did you also take a look at a file that's been marked for identification as People's Exhibit 69B?
Yes.
Can you pull up People's Exhibit 69B for just the witness, the parties, and the court? Do you recognize People's Exhibit 69B?
Yes.
What is this?
This is a contact list.
Is this the PDF version of the Excel file that was attached to that email?
Yes.
Has it been redacted?
Yes.
Other than the redactions, is this an exact copy of that native Excel file?
Yes.
The people offer Exhibit 69B into evidence.
No objection.
Accepted into evidence.
Can you describe this kind of at a high level for the jury?
Yes. This is a contact list of the president's friends, family, and people that he might want to speak to.
How did Ms. Graff determine who to put on this list? What types of contacts were put in?
It's my understanding that people that he either spoke to often or put together a list of might want to speak to.
Can you look at page 2 of the PDF, please? Focusing on the top portion of the page. Sorry. Pull up the entire portion with words. Do you see who's listed in rows 49, 50, and 51?
Yes.
Who is that?
Marianne, Robert, and Tiffany. The president's sister, brother, and daughter.
So that's the president's family?
Yes.
Looking at row 53, who is listed in row 53?
Alan Weisselberg.
Who is Alan Weisselberg?
The EVP and CFO of the Trump Organization.
And he was on that close contacts list that Ms. Graff prepared?
Yes.
Looking at the top of that page, who is listed in 41?
David Pecker.
Do you know who David Pecker is?
Yes.
Who is David Pecker, if you remember?
At the time, I knew him to just be a tabloid person.
Can we turn to the first page of the PDF and pull up the top half of the page? Who is listed in row 13?
Michael Cohen.
And is that the same Michael Cohen you saw in Trump Tower during the presidential transition period?
Yes.
Once you received this list, do you recall what you did with it?
I believe I entered all of these contacts into my contacts.
And if a name appeared on this list, were you more likely to patch that call through to Mr. Trump?
Yes, but I tried to, yes.
All right, we can take that down. Now, I know we just saw the contact information for Mr. Cohen. Was it your understanding that Mr. Trump and Mr. Cohen had a close relationship in 2017?
At that time, yes.
Did Mr. Cohen ever visit the White House in 2017?
I believe he did, yes.
Can we show the witness, the parties, and the court what's been marked for identification as People's Exhibit 391? Ms. Westerhout, do you see that on your screen?
Yes.
Do you recognize it?
Yes.
What is that?
It's an email from me to Michael Cohen.
Is it a true and correct copy of the email that you sent to Michael Cohen?
Yes.
People now offer People's Exhibit 391 into evidence.
No objection.
Accepted into evidence.
Can we publish that for the jury? What date was this email sent?
February 5th, 2017.
And the email is from you?
Yes.
Is it sent to Michael Cohen at a Trump.org email address?
Yes.
Are there redactions on this page?
Yes.
Did you have an opportunity to review the unredacted portion?
Yes.
What is the subject line of this email?
Wednesday meeting.
Can you please read the content of the email to the jury?
Yes. Michael, we're confirmed for 4:30 on Wednesday. What I need from you is the following. Full name as it appears on your ID. Date of birth, social security number, U.S. citizen, yes or no. Born in U.S., yes or no. Current city and state of residence. Thanks, Madeleine.
Do you recall why you were sending this email?
Mr. Cohen was coming in to meet with the president.
Do you recall seeing him when he came to visit?
Not specifically.
Did this visit ultimately occur?
Yes.
We can take that down. Do you remember David Pecker's name coming up in 2017?
I have recently been refreshed. My memory has been refreshed, yes.
After refreshing your recollection, what do you recall?
I recall an exchange between myself and Hope, a text that I sent her asking if she had called David.
By Hope, you mean Hope Hicks?
Yes.
And David is David Pecker?
Yes.
Do you recall if you ever spoke to Mr. Pecker on the phone in 2017?
I don't remember.
And do you remember if you saw him at the White House?
I don't remember. The president met with a lot of people.
Can we please pull up what's in evidence as People's Exhibit 319? Do you recognize this?
Yes.
What is this?
This is a text exchange between myself and Hope Hicks.
And whose texts are white?
Mine.
And whose texts are in blue?
Hope's.
Do you remember? Well, directing you now to the bottom text, does it say it was sent on March 20th?
Yes.
Does it say what year it was sent?
No.
Do you recall what year this was sent?
No.
Can you read that text to the jury?
Hey, the president wants to know if you called David Pecker again.
Do you remember the events surrounding this text?
No.
Was this unusual for you to send something like this to Ms. Hicks?
No.
And is this the document you were just speaking about that refreshed your recollection that you remembered Mr. Pecker's name coming up while you worked at the White House?
Yes.
Can we show the jury what's in evidence as People's Exhibit 70? Now, you said that Mr. Weisselberg was the CFO of the Trump Organization, right?
Yes.
Do you remember his name coming up in 2017?
Well, yes. I mean, he had worked for the president for a very long time. So yes.
And looking at the document on the screen in front of you, do you recognize this?
Yes.
What is this?
An email from me to Rona Graff.
And when was it sent?
January 27th, 2017.
What's the subject?
NYT. I'm sorry. Photo.
Can you read the content of the email to the jury?
Yes. Can you please send this to Alan Weisselberg from the president? He sent to his family and wanted Alan to see it as well. First time boarding Air Force One.
Is it common for Mr. Trump to send newspaper clips to his family and Mr. Weisselberg?
Yes.
Was it your understanding Mr. Trump and Mr. Weisselberg had a close relationship in 2017?
I'm not sure I can speak to the specifics of their relationship, but I believe Alan had worked for him for a long time, so I understood them to be close.
Did you pass messages back and forth between Mr. Weisselberg and Mr. Trump during 2017?
I don't recall specific messages other than this one, but it wouldn't surprise me.
This doesn't strike you as unusual?
Objection.
Overruled.
I'm sorry, say that again.
This doesn't strike you as unusual?
No.
Can we turn now to the attachment to the second page of the PDF? What is this?
This is the cover of the New York Times, and it's the president boarding Air Force One for the first time.
This is the newspaper clip that Mr. Trump asked you to send to both his family and Mr. Weisselberg?
Yes.
You can take that down. Now, what, if anything, is your understanding of how Mr. Trump's personal expenses were handled in 2017?
It's my understanding they were handled by checks.
And how did you learn that they were handled by checks?
Checks came to the White House. I'm sorry. Checks were sent from the Trump Organization to an employee at the White House, and I brought them in for the president to sign.
Do you know what employee the checks were sent to?
They were originally sent to Keith Schiller, and then later they were sent to me.
And what did you do when you received the checks?
The checks came in a FedEx envelope. So I opened the envelope, and inside was a manila folder with a stack of checks. And I brought the manila folder into the president for him to sign.
And was there anything else besides checks that were contained in the manila folder?
I didn't really dig around in the folder, but, I believe there were invoices attached to some of the checks sometimes.
And the checks that you received from Mr. Schiller, you received unsigned checks, is that right?
Yes.
You said you brought the checks into Mr. Trump for his signature?
Yes.
How frequently did you receive a package of checks for Mr. Trump to sign?
I don't recall how frequently, but it was, consistent, maybe twice a month.
And how many checks approximately came in a packet?
It depended. Sometimes there was. Sometimes there was one. Sometimes there was a stack, maybe half an inch thick. I never counted them.
Was it ever more than half an inch thick, or was it typically smaller?
I don't remember.
Now, did you ever see Mr. Trump sign checks in his office?
Sometimes, yes.
Did Mr. Trump individually sign each check by hand?
To my knowledge, the ones that I saw him sign. I can't speak to the ones that I didn't see him sign.
And what happened after Mr. Trump signed the checks?
He would give the folder back to me, and I would put it in a pre-labeled FedEx envelope and send it back to the Trump Organization.
Did the pre-labeled return envelope come with the original FedEx with the checks?
Yes.
And you were the one that sent that back to the Trump Organization?
Yes.
Do you recall if there was ever a time where Mr. Trump didn't send back every single check in a packet?
No, I don't recall a specific time.
Do you remember if Mr. Trump ever had questions about the checks?
I think I remember maybe a couple times him having a question about a check and then calling Alan Weisselberg or somebody else in the Trump Organization to ask for clarification.
All right. Can you please show the jury what is in evidence as People's Exhibit 73? Could you blow up the top portion of that document? Do you recognize this, Ms. Westerhout?
Yes.
What is this?
An email from Rona to me.
What's the date?
April 6th, 2017.
Can you read the content of the email to the jury?
Here is the FedEx label you requested. Hope it works. Winking face.
Can we turn? Is there an attachment to this email?
Yes.
Can you please flip to page 2 of the PDF? Focus on, that portion of the page. Do you recognize this?
Yes, it's a FedEx label.
Who is the FedEx label to?
Rebecca Minocchio.
What is the address?
The Trump.
Sorry, provided for Ms. Minocchio?
I'm sorry?
What is the address provided for Ms. Minocchio?
The Trump Organization, 725 Fifth Avenue, 26th floor, New York, New York.
Do you see who I don't know how to describe this. The return recipient is in the top left corner.
Yes, Keith Schiller.
Mr. Schiller was the one who received the checks that you ultimately brought in to Mr. Trump to sign?
At this time, yes.
Can you describe for the jury the context around this email?
I probably had misplaced the return package with the prepaid label, and so I was just requesting a new one.
And this is in connection with checks for Mr. Trump to sign or checks that he had signed?
Probably.
Did you ever request FedEx labels from the Trump Organization for any other reason?
Not to my recollection.
All right. Can we please show Ms. Westerhout and the jury what is in evidence as People's Exhibit 76? Do you recognize this?
Yes, it's an email from me to Rona Graff.
What's the date?
July 18th, 2017.
What's the subject?
Checks.
And can you read the content to the jury?
Can you have someone send me a FedEx label to send back the checks the president just signed?
Is this a reference to the personal checks that we were just talking about?
Probably.
And can we take that down? Did Trump Organization employees ever have other questions for Mr. Trump about his personal expenses, unrelated to the checks?
I don't know the answer to that.
There were no one-off questions about Mr. Trump's personal expenses that came through you.
Oh, yes.
Can we show the jury what's in evidence as People 71, please? Can we blow up the top of the email? Do you recognize this?
Yes, it's an email from me to Rona Graff.
What's the date?
February 21st, 2017.
What's the subject?
Winged Foot Golf Club.
Do you know what the Winged Foot Golf Club is?
I believe it's a golf club.
Can you read the content of the email to the jury?
Rona, can you help me with this? See attached. Thanks. Let me know if I should call them directly.
Can you flip to the second page of the PDF? Do you recognize this?
Yes.
What is this?
This is an invoice.
What is it an invoice for?
For the president's annual dues to the Winged Foot Golf Club.
Do you see handwriting on the document?
Yes.
Is there 2 sets of handwriting?
Yes.
Can we please blow up the bottom half of the page? Do you recognize both sets of handwriting on the page?
Yes.
And is the amount of the invoice also shown here?
Yes.
What is the total amount of the invoice?
$6,974.01.
Looking now at the handwriting towards the top, do you know whose handwriting that is?
I believe that's Rona Graff's.
Can you read what's written in Ms. Graff's writing?
Dear President, if Winged Foot will allow me to suspend your membership for 4 or 8 years, do you want me to look into it? Or do you want to continue paying annual dues and the food minimum? I believe that's just RG.
Do you see handwriting below that?
Yes.
Whose is that?
That's the president.
Do you know what type of pen was used for the president's handwriting?
It looks to be a Sharpie.
What's written below the note in Mr. Trump's handwriting?
Hey.
Is there something else written in the president's handwriting?
Yes, ASAP. Okay.
Is there another marking next to OK?
Yes, the shortened signature.
What is your recollection or understanding of what was happening in this email exchange?
This one. Obviously, he wouldn't really be able to use a membership of this golf club while he was in office. So I believe Rona was asking if she wanted him to suspend his membership or pay the annual dues.
Were you able to pass that question along to Mr. Trump for his evaluation or decision?
This was included in the stack of checks. So Yes, I passed it along in the sense that I gave him this note.
And was it your understanding that Mr. Trump individually approved the amount of this invoice?
Yes.
Can we now show the jury what is in evidence as People's Exhibit 75? Do you recognize this?
Yes, it's an email exchange between Rona and myself.
Can we focus on the bottom half of this page, please? Looking now at the email at the bottom of this email on the chain. Who is that from and to?
From me to Rona.
Was it dated, the email?
June 20th, 2017.
What's the subject line?
Photo.
Can you read the content to the jury?
This is what I have.
Do you remember what this email pertained to?
Yes. I believe this was in relation to a photograph that Mr. Trump, that President Trump wanted to put in a frame to put behind his desk in the Oval Office. So, behind the Resolute desk, there was a little credenza, and as time went on, he put pictures of his family behind him.
Can you read Ms. Graff's response to you about that in the email chain?
How? I never saw this one. And in color, too. It's not one of the photos I gave to Laura Trump. I'm trying to find out what happened to those. In answer to your question, however, I don't have any empty Tiffany frames. I could go to Tiffany's next door and get one with the account we have with them.
Can you read your response?
You don't mind doing that. That would be wonderful. He did mention a Tiffany frame.
Can you read Ms. Graff's response?
It says, "Please note that the frames are on the pricey side, about $650 minus 15% discount. Does DJT want to spend that much?"
What do you understand the frames were on the pricey side to mean?
That they were more expensive.
When it says, does DJT want to spend that much? Who does DJT refer to?
President Trump.
In your experience, is this the type of thing Mr. Trump would want to weigh in on?
I don't recall any other instances of this. I know this one was important and special because it was a photo of what I remember to be his mother, so he wanted a nice frame for that.
Was it unusual for Mr. Trump to weigh in on expenses of this amount?
I don't recall any other instances like this.
Do you remember if you passed this question on to Mr. Trump?
I don't. We may have made the executive decision without his approval. Sorry, sir.
Was it your understanding that this is the type of thing Ms. Graff would want Mr. Trump to look at?
I don't know. I think she may have. I don't know. I'm sorry.
Focusing on early 2018, do you remember a story coming out about Mr. Trump and a woman named Stormy Daniels?
Yes.
Do you remember Mr. Trump's reaction to that story?
I remember he was very upset by it.
Do you recall if Mr. Trump spoke to Michael Cohen around the time the story came out?
I believe they spoke around that time, yes.
In your position as Mr. Trump's executive assistant, did you interact with Mrs. Trump?
I did, yes.
Were you familiar with their relationship?
Yes.
How would you describe their relationship?
I believe they have a relationship of mutual respect. I just found their relationship really, special. I know he cares a lot about her opinion. There was really no one else that could kind of put him in his place, too. So, he was my boss, but she was definitely the one in charge. But I just remember thinking that their relationship was really special. They laughed a lot when she came into the Oval Office, and he would, once in a while tell me to call her and let her know that he was running late, just like any other marriage. Like, "Honey, I'm going to be late for dinner." She would call me sometimes and say, "It's past dinner time. When is my husband coming home?" So I just really respected their relationship.
Did anything about their relationship change after the Stormy Daniels story came out?
Not that I saw, no.
At some point, did you leave the White House job?
I did.
Can you very briefly describe the circumstances surrounding your departure?
Yes. In August of 2019, I was invited by a White House colleague of mine to what I understood to be an off-the-record dinner. And at that dinner, I said some things that I should not have said. That mistake, eventually, ultimately cost me my job. And I am very regretful of my youthful indiscretion. But I feel like I've learned a lot from that experience. I think I've grown a lot since then. Sorry.
The witness begins crying. The court gives the witness tissues. Witness crying.
Do you need a minute?
No, I'm okay.
Did you end up writing a book about your experience?
I did, yes.
Can we please show the witness, the parties, and the court People's Exhibit 392 for identification? Do you recognize this?
Yes, that's the cover of my book.
Is it an exact copy of the cover?
Yes.
The people now offer Exhibit 392 in evidence.
Any objection?
No objection.
392 accepted into evidence.
What is the full title of your book?
It is called Off the Record. my dream job at the White House, how I lost it and what I learned.
Why did you write the book?
I wrote the book because I needed time to process what I had just been through, but I also wanted to document for myself and my family the incredible experience that I had had working in the White House. I also felt it was really important to share with the American people the man that I got to know. I thought it was really important to share with the American people the man that I got to know. I don't think he's treated fairly, and I wanted to tell that story.
Witness crying.
Have you spoken to Mr. Trump since the publication of your book?
Since the publication, yes.
Can you briefly describe that for the jury?
He was at a fundraiser in Orange County where I lived last fall, and I hadn't seen him since I left the White House. And so I called one of his aides.
Witness crying.
Did you discuss this case at that time?
No, I did not. I called one of his aides and asked if I could come to the fundraiser to say hello, and they said yes. So I got to see him then.
Witness crying.
Have you spoken to him since that time?
No.
No further questions.
Your witness.
Do you want to take a short break?
No, we stop at 4 o'clock today.
Whereupon the witness continues crying.
Ms. Westerhout, you were very young when you were working at the White House, right?
Yes.
You made a mistake, right?
Yes.
President Trump forgave you, right?
He did.
Your book, in fact, was very flattering about him, right?
Yeah, I didn't have anything negative to say, so why would I write it?
You thought he was a great person to work for?
I did, yes, and he was.
And you thought he was a good president?
Yes.
Witness crying.
Are you ready to go on?
Yes.
So, during the 2016 election, before President Trump actually won the Republican nomination, you were working for the RNC?
Yes.
In fact, he was not your choice.
No.
He only became your choice once you got to know him, right?
Yes, that's right.
So once he won the election, you started working to help the transition, right?
Yes.
And you still didn't know him, right?
No.
But before the transition, there was the Access Hollywood tape that you were asked about on direct examination, right?
Yes.
And you testified on cross that it rattled the RNC leadership, correct?
That's my recollection, yes.
There were a couple of days of consternation, right?
Yes.
That happened all the time during the campaign, right?
Yeah.
There's always some event that causes total consternation for a couple of days, right?
Yes.
And when President Trump was running for election, there was always some event that everybody said, claps twice, that's it, he's not going to win, right?
Yes.
And everybody around would be freaking out, right?
Yeah.
But not President Trump, right?
No.
He did not freak out about any of this, right?
Not that I was aware of.
He just kept his mind straightforward and kept running for the election, right?
Objection.
Overruled. You can answer.
Can you repeat that?
He kept working and running to win the presidency, right?
Yes.
After the Access Hollywood tape came out, some of the people freaked out, right, in the RNC?
Yes.
And President Trump did not freak out, right?
No.
He gave a video statement, am I correct?
Not that I remember, but I trust you.
Okay, do you recall him giving a public statement saying that this was locker room talk and apologizing for that locker room talk?
Yes, I do.
And he said, and I look forward to seeing everybody at the debate.
Yeah.
And the Access Hollywood tape uproar blew over in a couple of days, right?
Yeah.
And after that, President Trump won the election.
He did.
Now, the transition was an extremely busy time for President Trump, right?
Yes.
He had to fill hundreds of positions, right?
Yes.
Those were in his cabinet, correct?
Yes.
And other high-level positions, right?
Yes.
And he had to figure out what those positions were, right?
Yes.
And he had to find candidates to fill those positions, right?
Yes.
And then he had to interview all those people, right?
Yes.
And part of your job was to help find those people and pre-vet them, right?
Yeah. Yes. At least schedule the interviews. I don't know if I was involved in finding them or vetting them, but scheduling their interviews, yes.
Were you involved in helping create briefing papers?
Yes, I think I did a lot of them, yes.
And those were multiple page documents, lengthy documents that would be given to President Trump or President-elect at that point.
Yes.
So he could read them and be ready to interview these people, right?
Yes.
You were scheduling as much as 3 interviews a day for President Trump with these high-level people, right?
Yes.
Those would be lengthy interviews, correct?
Yes.
The prosecutor just asked you on direct examination whether the press called you the greeter girl, right?
Yeah.
And they did that because you would go downstairs in Trump Tower and escort people up, right?
Yes. Trump Tower was in the middle of Midtown Manhattan. It's protected by Secret Service. and these people were coming in for the most important interviews of their lives. So I took it upon myself to greet them downstairs so they wouldn't get lost.
Them calling you the greeter girl was a little bit belittling your work, right?
Yeah, I tried to not let it get to me, but I think people said I was unqualified.
Because you were doing work that was a lot more important than just greeting people, right?
Yes.
But that's how the press treated you at that time, right?
Yes.
And that's what the prosecutor just asked you about, right?
No response from the witness.
On direct, she asked you if you were called the greeter girl?
Yes.
This is a very busy and hectic time, right?
Yes.
President Trump was also transitioning his companies at that point into a trust, right?
Not to my knowledge, but...
So you were not involved in his business?
No.
What was going on in his business?
No.
You were involved in just the political side, right?
Yes.
But you are aware he was also running a substantial business until became elected president, right?
Yes.
And you knew he had to put that all to the side and just move to become president, right?
Yes.
And he only had a month and a half to do that.
Yeah, November, December, 2.5.
2.5 months to do all of that, right?
Uh-huh.
And you were asked on direct examination, 1 minute, Judge, after the transition, you moved to the White House.
Yes.
And that was the first time you were really working closely with President Trump, right?
Yes.
What was that like?
It was amazing. I think I really had not spent any time with him. But I don't know if anybody should feel like they deserve to be in the West Wing, but he made me. He never once made me feel like I didn't deserve that job and I didn't belong there, especially in an office filled with older men. He never made me feel like I didn't belong there. He was a really good boss. I hope he respected me and my job, and yeah, I just found him very enjoyable to work for.
And you were asked some questions on direct examination about the way that President Trump interacted with his family. Do you recall those questions?
Yes.
And he had a close relationship with his children, right?
Very close, yes.
And he cared a great deal for them, right?
Definitely.
And you also said you observed him that he had a close and lovely relationship with his wife?
Yes.
Isn't it true that you would also see them sort of personally communicating during the day in some way?
Yes. Sometimes I would look down on my phone, and if the red light was on, I knew that he was on the phone, but I hadn't placed the call. So if he was sitting in the Oval Office, I would kind of look up and look into the Oval Office, and there were times when I could kind of figure out that he was on the phone with Mrs. Trump. And he would say, honey, come over to the window. And there was a window in the residence where you could see from the residence into the Oval Office. And he would say, come to the window, and they would kind of wave to each other. When he was, boarding Marine One on the South Lawn, he would call Mrs. Trump and say, honey, I'm about to board, which I always found funny. Like, of course she knows his schedule. He just wanted to say hi and check in.
You were asked if the first year of the presidency was a transition year, right?
Yes.
And you said it was particularly hectic, right?
Yes.
And some days President Trump would work from 6 a.m. in the morning?
Yes, uh-huh.
And sometimes he wouldn't go home until very late at night?
That's right.
And all day he would be taking calls, right?
Oh, yes, uh-huh.
And meeting with people?
Yes.
And you said he was reading documents and reviewing them?
Yes, uh-huh.
And he was also signing a tremendous amount of documents, right?
Yes, uh-huh.
And there was a lot of things that he was doing that you didn't really know the details of, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And you were asked by the prosecutor if you coordinated with the Trump Organization during that first year by asking questions of the Trump Organization employees, right?
Yes.
The person that you coordinated with most was Rona Graff, right?
Yes.
And this did not have to do with the Trump Organization business, did it?
No.
It had to do with his personal affairs, right?
Yes, uh-huh.
For example, you needed his contact list, right?
Yes, uh-huh.
You didn't know who he would want to get calls from, right?
That's right.
And you didn't know the phone numbers of people, right? And you needed his calendar from before, right?
I don't think I needed his calendar. But yeah, a lot of things that you would think, like, as a new executive assistant, you would get. But there was no transition into the White House, so Rona was very helpful.
So that first year, you spent a lot of time talking with Rona Graff, right?
Yes.
But you did not spend time talking with the Trump Organization employees to coordinate business of the Trump Organization, right?
No,
It was just personal aspects for President Trump, right?
That's correct.
Is this a good time to break, Your Honor?
Yes. Is this a good time?
Yes.
This video was brought to you by my supporters on Indiegogo. YouTube will not monetize these videos, so I can only afford to keep making them with your support. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, please donate to my Indiegogo campaign so we can finish this trial. You can find the campaign linked at the top of the description or scan the QR code on screen now.
All right, let's get the witness.
Witness entering.
Good morning, Ms. Westerhout. You are reminded that you are still under oath.
Yes.
All right, let's get the jury, please.
All rise. Jury entering.
Please be seated.
Will both parties stipulate that all jurors present and properly seated?
Yes.
Yes.
Good morning, jurors. Welcome back.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning.
Good morning.
We spoke a little yesterday about the travel schedule. Do you recall that? Or, I'm sorry, withdrawn, we spoke a little bit yesterday about the campaign.
Yes.
And you were working on the RNC hearing, right?
Yes.
What is the RNC?
The Republican National Committee.
And there came a point where President Trump won the Republican nomination, right?
Yes.
And after that, am I correct that the RNC and the campaign worked extremely closely together?
Yes.
Because at that point, President Trump is the presumptive Republic. Is the Republican nominee, and the RNC wants, just like the campaign wants, to get him nominated, right?
Absolutely. Yes.
So you guys were basically one unit, right?
That's right.
And am I correct that every day the TNC and the campaign would jointly create a travel schedule or document that there was a travel schedule for the president?
Whenever the president-elect was traveling, yes,
And it would. So it included everything that he was going to be doing on that day, correct?
Yes.
And I want to show you and the prosecutors what has been marked as L Defendants Exhibit L8 and L9. I apologize. I might not have set this up. Your Honor, if it's okay, I will come back to it.
Yes, of course.
We will come back to that. So I want you to look then at People's Exhibit 69 in evidence. And the prosecutor asked you about this on direct. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And Rona Graff gave you this list, right?
Yes.
And that was the list of contacts that Rona Graff said that prior to the time that President Trump became president, that these were contacts he used in his business, right?
That's right.
And these are people that were personal friends and also business acquaintances, that he worked with, right?
That's right.
And that's what Rona Graff created for you?
Yes.
But there were many people on that list, and to your understanding is that these were people that President Trump spoke to a lot before he became president, right?
Spoke to before he became president, or might be interested in speaking to invite them to the White House or something.
And there were many people on that list who never called the Oval Office, right?
Many, yes.
And to the best of your knowledge, there were many people on that list that President Trump never called while he was in the Oval Office, right?
That's correct.
And I want to turn to People's Exhibit 70, which is an email from you to Rona Graff. And you sent that to Rona Graff, right?
Yes.
And you were asking whether she could pass on a newspaper clipping, right?
Yes.
And if you turn to the next page, there is that newspaper clipping, right?
Yes.
And if we could blow up the top part, it's a picture of the president the first time he boarded Air Force One, right?
Yes.
Kind of an exciting thing, right?
Exciting, yeah.
And he sent it to his family?
Uh-huh.
Right?
Yes.
Did he send that to a lot of people?
Yeah, uh-huh.
He was proud?
He was proud, yeah.
And he would write a little note to the people on it, right?
Uh-huh, yes.
And that was something that President Trump did a lot.
Yes.
Sending newspaper clippings, right?
Yes, quite often.
And in fact, you probably saw him do this thousands of times, right?
Yes.
He would send newspaper clippings of something that happened to people that he knew, right?
That's right.
And he would write a little note on them, right?
Yeah.
So once he sent one to Alan Weisselberg, right?
That's right.
Like thousands of times he sent them to other people, right?
Yes.
And you were asked on many. And so when you were asked on direct, you were asked the question whether it was not unusual for him to have sent this newspaper clipping. Do you recall that?
Uh-huh, yes.
What you meant by that was it wasn't unusual for him to send them to everybody newspaper clippings, right?
That's right.
But with respect to sending them to Alan Weisselberg, do you recall what happened other times?
Not that I can recall, no.
This might have been the only time that he was president that he sent something like this to Alan Weisselberg, right?
It could have been, yes.
And you were asked if you spoke to Alan Weisselberg during when he was president. Do you recall that about checks?
Yes.
And am I correct that you do not have any specific recollection of Alan Weisselberg and the president and President Trump speaking during the first year that President Trump was in office?
That's correct, yes.
And you have a vague recollection that at some point they might have spoken about a check.
Yes, vaguely, uh-huh.
But you're not even sure that that's true, right?
No.
And in fact, you really don't recall any calls specifically between him and Alan Weisselberg, right?
No, he spoke to so many people.
And I want to turn back to, I think we're ready to look at L8 and L9 for the witness and the parties only.
Your Honor, we object to this and we ask to approach.
Sure.
At sidebar.
Yes, I'm happy to get to see you all so much.
We have several papers with this exhibit. I broke this again, Judge. I'm sorry. I think maybe some glue. I'm going to bring some glue.
Good idea.
I think that there are several with this, first of all. And I think that this is unlike some of the exhibits that the defense used on cross-examination because they were responsive. This is totally outside of the scope of the direct. And this is exactly the problem that we identified at the beginning of this trial, which is that they hadn't designated any exhibits, and that Your Honor had precluded any exhibits that directed, case-in-chief exhibits that were not designated by the following day. They didn't designate any. So, and we specifically raised the specter of the defense trying to make our witnesses their own and backdoor that preclusion by trying to put in non-responsive exhibits, which are really case-in-chief exhibits, under the guise that this is cross-examination. Now, this is fully beyond the scope of the direct examination. We didn't ask a single question about the president's travel schedule or the president-elect's travel schedule. And to top it all off, these travel schedule exhibits are from October. She testified she wasn't even there at Trump Tower or working with the defendant until after Election Day. So this should be precluded, this entire area.
I would just add to that she also never testified that she worked on the travel schedule. She said that she scheduled things in Trump Tower.
Ms. Nichelles, what's the purpose of this?
So, Your Honor, we are just putting it in evidence. We are not going through them. She testified on direct about his schedule, and they have been talking about his schedule. We just are interested in what happens, actually, on one of those days, October 26th. And this is a document that was created jointly by the campaign and the RNC. She was working at the RNC that day. She received these documents every day at the RNC. On those days, she received these every day when she was working, and they were made and kept in the ordinary course of business.
What's the purpose of this?
It is to show what he was doing on that one day.
Why?
On October 26th. Because it's an issue in this trial in terms of the people are putting in phone documents about it, about what happened, his conversations with Michael Cohen, and this explains what he was doing with Cohen. It's one document, Your Honor.
I appreciate that, but...
Yes.
Why don't you just ask her about that day?
What's the people's objection to this document?
Why don't you just ask? Do you know? Do you know what Donald Trump was doing on October 26th?
She doesn't recall.
She doesn't?
Your Honor, but the business records can establish it, and she can establish this as a business record.
She was there at the time?
Yes, she was there at the time. She worked for the RNC.
Who created this?
The RNC and the campaign jointly created it.
She didn't say that.
She will. I haven't been able to ask her questions about it yet.
You are getting close.
Yes, I haven't been able to ask her about this yet. We weren't able to put it up on the screen. I was about to establish a business record foundation. That's what I'm doing, what I was going to do right now.
This is exactly the problem. We did not ask a single question about scheduling or the work that she did prior to the election. Ms. Nichelles asked about scheduling and meetings in January. But this door is not opened. This is vintage and an end run around Your Honor's ruling, and it should not be countenance.
Judge, I have to say also, these documents are not like a surprise to the people. They came to us in discovery. It's not like I'm showing documents that they have never seen before.
But the issue is whether you intended to put them in all along.
I actually just thought about this last night. We never intended to put it in before. I thought of this last night. I never thought of putting it in before then.
You need to lay a rock-solid foundation. If you can even lay the foundation for this, then I will allow it. But if you are unable to, then it's not coming.
Those are ours, thanks.
Sidebar concluded.
Ms. Westerhout, do you recognize that document in front of you?
I do, yes.
And is that a travel schedule that was created by the Trump campaign and the RNC jointly?
It appears to be, yes.
And were those travel schedules created every day that President Trump was traveling during the campaign?
Yes.
And were they shared with the RNC and the campaign?
I believe so, yes.
And you were working at the RNC at that point, am I correct?
Yes.
And would you receive these travel schedules?
I don't believe I personally received them.
But would you see them?
Probably, yes.
And you saw them during the course of when you were working at the RNC, right?
Yes.
And when you say probably, you are not sure whether you saw these exact ones, correct?
That's right, uh-huh.
But you saw the travel schedules on a regular basis, right?
Uh-huh, yeah.
And you knew that they were created in the ordinary course of business of the RNC and the campaign, correct?
Yes.
And you knew that they were kept in the ordinary course of business of the RNC and the campaign, right?
That's right.
And it was the ordinary course of business for the RNC and the campaign jointly to create and keep these records, correct?
Yes.
I offer them in evidence, Your Honor.
May I voir dire, Your Honor?
Yes.
Ms. Westerhout, do you have any specific recollection of seeing these documents?
Yes.
These particular documents in front of you?
Yes, my lawyer showed it to me.
But
I'm sorry.
during, contemporaneously with the underlying events in October of 2016, do you have an independent recollection of receiving these personally?
No.
When did your lawyer have you review these? And please, when you answer, don't go into any discussion that you had with your lawyer.
This morning.
We object.
Please approach.
At sidebar.
So the people called this witness, right? I don't know how they got them this morning. How did they get them this morning?
I sent them this morning, I called them, and then I sent it this morning.
Because you intended to present it to the witness?
It just happened that I thought of it last night.
And we didn't even get notice of this until the witness was on the stand in the middle of questions. I mean, this is just sandbagging.
Judge, I just sent them this morning, and then maybe 10 minutes before I walked in here that I was able to talk to them. She did recognize many of them. She said it. This is really a very last-minute thing.
But you were trying to lay a foundation. You already knew that she didn't see this, and you already knew her answer. And this is not even your witness.
Your Honor, of course I did. I tried to present it to her.
This is something that the people asked for months before this trial that you did not give notice of what the exhibits were that you were going to use. So for two reasons, I'm keeping it out. Reason number one, you should have given it to the people. You did not present it to them prior to her testifying. And two, her answers are far from that which she can establish this as a business record. I'm not allowing it in.
Judge, may I respond on one issue? We are getting the flip side of this with exhibits that are being created and sent to us the night before. Judge, they are summarily giving us exhibits in that way.
We can discuss that later.
So it should be reciprocal.
We can discuss that later.
Sidebar concluded.
Okay, thanks. So I want to...
I'm sorry, your motion to introduce this into evidence is denied.
Thank you, Your Honor. I want to turn your attention to the questions that you were asked about checks.
Uh-huh.
All right, and you were asked a lot of questions about how checks were sent. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And I want to show you what is Exhibit 66 in evidence. And that can be shown to everybody. So this is an email chain about addresses, about how to send stuff to the White House, right?
Yes.
And if we can blow up the bottommost part, the bottom entry, thank you. And there were questions being asked about how to, that was John McEntee saying, can you put me in touch with Rebecca because Keith is leaving and checks need to be sent to him, right?
Correct.
Objection.
Overruled.
And that occurred at some point along the lines when you were sending, Keith Schiller was leaving the White House, right?
Yes.
And I want to move a little bit back, and we can take that down. And I want to move a little bit back to the first when you got to the White House. And you said yesterday you didn't know anything when you got there, right?
No.
You had been working on the transition team, but there was really no transition for you, right?
That's right.
And you walked into the White House and you didn't know how President Trump would get personal items, right?
No, I did not.
And you didn't know how his wife would get personal items, right?
No.
And there was a lot of security about things that get sent to the White House, wasn't there?
Yes.
And that includes checking any mail or items that get received, right?
That's right, uh-huh.
So at some point you were told that there was a post office box that had been set up for the president to get personal items, right?
That's right.
And then it turned out that that was a slow way to receive things, right?
Yes.
And because of the security, correct?
Yes, uh-huh.
And am I correct that it was also slow because things would get lost, right?
Yeah, uh-huh.
And that sometimes you would find out that things had been sent to the White House and that for President Trump personally, and he never received it, right?
Yes, uh-huh.
And President Trump told you that friends of his were feeling that he was being disrespectful to them, right?
Objection.
Sustained.
Well, he was. President Trump was upset that he was not getting personal emails or personal information, personal documents and letters from friends of his, right?
Objection.
Sustained.
Well, wasn't that a problem about getting mail to President Trump through the White House?
Yes.
And President Trump, liked to return calls promptly. You testified yesterday?
Yes.
And you testified yesterday that he felt like it was disrespectful if he didn't return calls promptly, right?
Yes.
Objection.
Overruled.
And so you all tried to figure out a way that he could get his mail promptly, right?
That's right.
And the same for the First Lady, that she could get things promptly, right?
That's right.
And it was the same problem for Ivanka Trump, right? That she could get personal things promptly, right?
I don't have specific knowledge of Ms. Trump, but probably.
And the idea had come up that things would be sent to Keith Schiller,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And that's how it came to be that Keith Schiller started to receive these checks personally, right?
That's right, yes.
And when Keith Schiller, and he received other mail that was personal for President Trump, right?
Right.
And he also received things that were personal for Melania Trump, right?
Yes.
Melania Trump?
The First Lady, right?
Because the First Lady also had the same problem, right?
Yes.
And then Keith Schiller would bring in these items and give them to you, right?
That's right.
And you would give them to President Trump, right?
Yes.
And when Keith Schiller left, it was transferred to another person that the email got sent that we just saw, right?
Yes.
And then when that other person left, it became your job, right?
That's right.
And that's what this whole testimony about FedEx packages was about, right?
Yes.
It was a way that items could be sent to you and you could get them promptly to President Trump, right?
That's right.
And is it your understanding that this workaround existed in prior administrations as well?
Objection.
Sustained.
Well, wasn't it a new workaround that you all came up with? Was it?
Objection.
Overruled.
Judge, can we approach? Thank you. It wasn't a new workaround that you all came up with, was it? Was it your understanding that this problem with getting items promptly to the President of the United States existed for everybody who is in that office?
Objection.
Overruled.
I don't have any knowledge of what it was like in previous administrations, but I can't imagine it would have been any different.
Now, when you received, just focusing, when you received whatever packages there was, you would give them to President Trump or to the First Lady, correct?
Yes.
And you had nothing to do with giving documents or packages to Ms. Trump, Ivanka Trump?
No,
And do you know how she got them?
I don't.
And you would leave whatever items came for President Trump on his desk, right?
That's right.
And with respect to the checks, they came in a folder, am I correct?
Yes.
And if he had the time when you gave them to him, he would sign them?
Yes. If he had the time and if he was in the office, yes.
And you said he signed a tremendous amount of items, right?
Yes.
And there were proclamations that he was signing?
Yes, commissions, proclamations, executive orders, memos, letters.
And that would take up many hours of his day, right?
Yes.
Because he did not like to have that in printed form, right?
No.
He felt that if someone was getting his signature, they deserved his real signature, right?
Yes, absolutely. Objection.
Sustained.
Move to strike.
And
Move to strike.
Stricken from the record.
And were there times, with all these, would you say it was hundreds of documents that he was signing?
Not every day, but sometimes,
And this was in between other things that he was doing, right?
Oh, yes,
And so would you see him signing things without reviewing them?
Yes.
And would you see him signing checks without reviewing them?
Yes.
And you would see him signing checks while he was on the phone, right?
Yes.
Would you see him signing checks when he was meeting with people?
Yes.
And there were different types of people that he was meeting with, right?
Yes.
Sometimes he was meeting with the top foreign leaders in the world, right?
Yes,
And other times he was meeting with you.
Yeah,
And so he wouldn't be signing the checks when he was meeting with the top people in the world.
Yes.
But maybe when he was meeting with you, talking about something else, he would also be signing documents.
Yes. Talking about the schedule or anything that had been going on.
The chief of staff that he would be meeting with.
Yes.
And other people he would be doing that.
That's right.
He was a person who multitasked, right?
Definitely.
And now I want to ask you about some other items that we are showing. If we could show Exhibit 71, and that's an evidence. People's Exhibit 71, we can show it to everybody. And Madeleine Westerhout sent you this, right? Oh, you sent this to her, and it says, Rona, can you help me with this, right?
Yes.
And if we can turn to the next page, it's an invoice, right?
Yes.
And this is a personal expense of President Trump, right?
Right.
And it was sent to you and with the question from Rona, right?
Yes.
And she wanted to know what to do with this, right?
Right.
And in your experience, Rona Graff was very careful about not wanting to spend the president's money without his approval, right?
Yes,
And so she wanted to check with him, right?
Yes.
It's his money, right?
Yes.
And so she would send you this kind of thing and ask him.
Yes.
And he answered it with one word, right?
Right.
Just pay, right?
Right.
Boom, it was off his desk, right?
Right.
Because he was extremely busy, right?
Yes.
And I want to turn your attention now to another exhibit. I'm sorry, I just don't know the exhibit number. People's Exhibit 75. Yes. And do you recall being shown this on direct? This is a series of emails about about a frame that President Trump wanted.
Yes.
And again, Rona Graff was asking questions about the price of the frame, right?
Right.
And just to be clear, President Trump was putting in the credenza in back of where he sat a number of photographs, right?
Yes.
And they were photographs of people who were important to him, right?
Yes, his family.
He had a photograph of his father.
Uh-huh.
He had a photograph of his wife and children. Is that correct?
Yes, uh-huh.
And he wanted a photograph of his mother?
Yeah.
And so he wanted a nice frame?
That's right.
And those frames, those photographs, when he would be sitting at the Resolute desk, they would be right behind him, right?
That's right.
And often pictures that were taken would show the photographs behind him, right?
That's right, uh-huh.
And so he was looking for a very nice frame, right?
Yes.
But Rona Graff, again, was not comfortable spending the president's money, right?
To my understanding, yes.
And so you said on direct you made an executive decision to just okay this, right?
Yes. I don't remember specifically, but that could have very well been the case.
Because when President Trump was in the White House, you understood he was too busy to be dealing with this kind of thing, right?
Yes.
His life may have been different before when he was just running a major company in the United States, but it was different when he was running the United States, right?
Objection.
Overruled.
That's right.
Now, you were asked some questions about, or you were in the White House, am I correct, when there came? There was a story about Stormy Daniels, right?
That's right.
And you were working with President Trump very closely with him at that point, right?
Yes.
And did there come a time when there was a story about Stormy Daniels in the paper?
Yes.
And did you have a conversation with President Trump about that?
Yes, I did.
And based on that conversation, what was your understanding of his feelings about this story?
That he was very upset by it.
And why?
My understanding is that he knew it would be hurtful to his family.
And that was based on what he said to you. Was that your understanding?
I don't believe he specifically said that, but I could just tell that the whole situation was very unpleasant.
Objection. Move to strike.
Sustained. The answer is stricken.
Well, when you say he didn't specifically say that, he spoke about his family?
Meaning, he didn't specifically speak about his family in that conversation.
Okay. If I may have a moment.
Defense counsel confer.
I have no further questions.
Any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning, Ms. Westerhout.
Good morning.
So, on cross-examination, Ms. Nichelles was just asking you about the method of sending checks via FedEx to the White House, right?
Yes.
And you testified that there were certain standard security protocols in place at the White House for normal channels of mail?
Yes.
Was the method of sending checks through FedEx to somebody's personal address an end run around the White House security protocols?
No, not to my understanding, no. It was just a way to get things to him faster.
And they wouldn't go through the typical screening process for mail at the White House, right?
That's right.
Now, you did not meet Mr. Trump for the first time until after the election, right?
That's right.
And was that in November of 2016?
Yes.
And you testified on cross-examination that you really had not spent any time with Mr. Trump until January of 2017, right?
Yes, not a significant amount of time.
And in the period of November 2016 through January 2017, in that transition period, you testified that you worked out of Trump Tower?
Yes.
Did you sit on a different floor from Mr. Trump?
Yes.
And did the RNC leadership in general sit on a different floor from Mr. Trump?
Yes.
On cross-examination, Ms. Nichelles didn't ask you if you had spoken to her before, right?
She did not.
Have you spoken to Ms. Nichelles before?
I have.
How many times?
Once.
And when did you last speak to her?
2 nights ago, Wednesday night.
On cross-examination, you told Ms. Nichelles that Mr. Trump did not freak out about the Access Hollywood tapes, right?
Did I? I don't recall saying that.
The tape came out in October of 2016, right?
Yes.
And you did not meet Mr. Trump until after the election in November of 2016, right?
That's right.
And you didn't spend any real time with him until January 2017, right?
Not a significant amount of time, yes.
So you have no first-hand knowledge about his reaction to the Access Hollywood tape, right?
No first-hand knowledge, no.
And you testified on cross-examination that while serving as president, Mr. Trump signed commissioned proclamations, executive orders, memos, and other documents, right?
Yes.
And it is your testimony that Mr. Trump signed those documents without reviewing them?
Not all of them. But he had people who did that for him that he trusted to prepare documents for his signature. So by the time they got to his desk, it was ready for his signature.
And you testified on direct that you worked at a geopolitical consulting firm?
Yes.
Is that American Global Strategies?
Yes.
And I think you testified that you are the chief of staff for the chairman?
Yes.
Who is the chairman?
Ambassador Robert O'Brien.
Was he President Trump's national security advisor from 2019 to 2021?
Yes, he was.
No further questions.
Any recross?
Yes, Your Honor. You were asked just whether you met with me prior to this?
Yes.
And we met for about an hour?
That's right.
By Zoom the other night?
That's right.
Did you meet with the prosecutor before this?
I did.
How many times?
3.
And when was the most recent time?
Wednesday morning.
And those were for hours?
Yes.
And just to reiterate, President Trump was very close to his family, right?
Yes.
And it was your impression that he was very upset with all?
Objection.
Sustained.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Anything else?
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Thank you. You can step down.